that a British League might take years to set up.
It certainly gave us extra cause for thought, as it were, and certainly played a big part in our decisions. Maybe that was the true agenda coming out. That you know, I think we believe that maybe the unions, certainly the Welsh Rugby Union, do not want strong independent clubs in Wales.
Well, I'm disappointed if that's the case, because firstly, as I've said very plainly, I don't know under whose name the article appeared, but that person did not speak to me.
If we had to wait another 2 to 3 years for improved competition, would have been a death sentence for us.
If Swansea chose to act upon what is contained in that article, then I regret the fact that either they or somebody else did not pick up the telephone and say, is whatever it is that appears in the article correct or not, because they didn't.
The new season welcomed with hidden agendas, broken trust and complex personality clashes. But there is a simple truth. Had Swansea remained loyal, their domestic fixture list would have been 7 home Premier games, a cup run perhaps, and then the Challenge Trophy, that strange collection of friendlies. On such a diet, rugby clubs do not grow into fat cats.
We'd won the league well, and we ended up making a loss in the order of £200,000. Now, we're an incorporated body now. We were encouraged some 2 years ago by the union to incorporate. We have a board of directors. So all of a sudden you then got to look at, well, what does the Welsh League offer us next year?
If you look at their fixture list, there wasn't very much there that was going to excite you, and I think that Welsh Rugby has suffered hugely from being so introverted for so long.
Our projections were that we're going to lose probably even more money. So really I think that that sort of weighed very, very heavily on our decision. I can remember sort of 3 or 4 years ago, our actual gate at a Llanelli Swansea game would have been £40,000–50,000. Last season we were a televised game. I think we took something like between £8,000 and £9,000. Now you cannot sustain a professional operation doing that with one of your prime attractions.
Swansea should have been patient and left it for a year. They should have stayed within our Premier Division, participated in the European Cup for the current season, to give us time to work with them and with the other Premier clubs to formally establish a British League for next season.
We would have had exactly the same structure as last year, and again, if that had been all that was on offer, we'd have had to make the best of it, and we would have made the best of it. But because we had explored the potential, and there was on offer this potential, this great prize, we say, we felt severely let down.
When you examine it in the cold light of day, it's not a rational business decision to have taken. It's not a rational Welsh decision to have taken. And I don't think that when we see in due course how events really establish whether or not who's right or who's wrong, it's a right Swansea decision.
At the end, when everything was balanced out, and believe me, there was a lot of debate, we felt we had no choice to make other than to go this route.
Good evening. With just 2 weeks to the start of the new season, the 2 rebel Welsh rugby clubs, Cardiff and Swansea, have today finally turned their backs on the Welsh Premier Division.
It's a gamble, yeah, sure it's a gamble, but it's a gamble that we think is worth taking, given the what we're fighting for, the independence of our club. But we feel it's a gamble worth taking, and I've got to say we've been tremendously supported by an awful lot of people. not only in Swansea but throughout Wales as well.
The rebel Anglo-Welsh fixtures, the leftovers of a grand plan for a British League. How has it all come to this? A rebel circus with rebel referees. It's all about control, who runs professional rugby. And until the question of control is resolved, there will be chaos. For the moment, though, even chaos is commercially sounder for Swansea.
Our first game against West Hartlepool, which, you know, perhaps in due respect to West Hartlepool, they're not the most attractive of fixtures. There was a gate of 3,900 actual bodies there, which, if compared to last year, was our third biggest gate.
The honeymoon of playing West Hartlepool will soon wear off. Come the dark November days, are the English clubs going to be playing their best teams?
And let's be quite clear about this. This is not altruism we're talking about here. This is commercialism. I mean, if the two Welsh clubs in question were Newbridge and Ebbw Vale, I don't think you'd have had the English clubs, you know, falling over themselves to look after them. And they're looking after Cardiff and Swansea because they can bring crowds to the English competition. It can never be the same in Wales now. I can't see Cardiff and Swansea going back just to play in a Welsh system.
Rugby has changed forever, and in terms of support, it is the rebel cause that has been embraced by the public. Over 10,000 turned up at the Arms Park to watch Cardiff play England's Cup champions Saracens. That's more than the combined total of spectators at all the official Premier League games that weekend.
My criticism of the WRU is that they saw this coming a mile away. In fact, in some ways they sort of provoked it by saying you sign a 10-year agreement or you don't play in the Premiership, which I don't think was the most clever thing, because it gave the clubs an excuse perhaps to look elsewhere.
I think the Cardiff and Swansea players are looking forward to it more than the Welsh players. One, it's new. Secondly, they're playing against players that you know, they see in the national scene, especially now with the Allied Dunbar, with their foreign players. It's a learning curve because you've got to find out their weaknesses and strengths, and then, you know, try and exploit those.
But these are still rebel fixtures, played without the blessing of the unions and in contravention of international board regulations.
It's not our priority here today to look to take sanctions. We mustn't deepen the rift that is between us at the moment. We must try to work to find a solution.
Since Cardiff and Swansea went their own way, there's been a lot of huffing and puffing, but nobody's actually done anything to stop them. There's been, you know, apart from referees, well, that's not an insurmountable problem.
I think they're part of Wales, that's the long and short of it. They're not part of a greater England, and Welsh rugby needs them back, and I think that's what we should be working for. Understanding, however, that you know, if the divisions are so deep that it's not possible, then we simply have to build upon the strength, and there's great strength which is left amongst the other clubs.
To try and think of a British league involving Welsh clubs that didn't involve Cardiff and Swansea would be loony. You know, and there've been some loony things happening in rugby lately, but I hope that wouldn't be one that was continuing.
The All Whites of Swansea being led out by Scott Gibbs. The Newcastle Falcons, the champions of the Allied Dunbar League in England.
Unpunished and well supported, Swansea and Cardiff appear to be prospering. But where does that leave the other professional clubs of Wales? Clubs like Llanelli, who did sign the loyalty agreement.
This season is one of being very careful, playing within our means, albeit perhaps in a substandard Premier Division. But ensuring that when the British League does come, we're all still here. That's the most important thing.
Now you take the start of this season, Llanelli against Ebbw Vale at Stradey. Lovely evening, albeit a 5:30 kickoff, which isn't ideal. But barely 2,000 people. And so you look at Saracens on the one hand as a sort of new breed of professional rugby club, and you look at Llanelli, the most rugby town of Wales, probably the greatest rugby name in Britain, and they're struggling to survive. And I fear for their future.
Welsh rugby at the moment is at its lowest ebb. I think two of its biggest clubs playing outside this union is a detriment to us all. Not just to Cardiff and Swansea, to the union, to all of us, that we couldn't get around the table and thrash out something that kept us, for at least one more season, united as a Welsh Premier Division.
Commercial pressures will dictate that Cardiff and Swansea have to play in a higher level of competition. I think these are market forces which, however messy the whole thing may get, I think that is an inevitability. That will ultimately happen.
And how many professional clubs will be left?
Perhaps only two, and that's the frightening thing. Pontypridd, maybe three. I can't see any more than that, which really leaves you worrying about Llanelli, Newport, Ebbw Vale. I just think that they will just have to revert to part-time rugby.
Meanwhile, at St Helens, the architects of the future survey their plans. No, the generals of the future ponder their strategies. Rugby's fight to the finish has only just begun.
Most of the English clubs are now owned by investors. And we came in, there's no money in the game. It's going to come in years to come as the TV rights get a value. But we all know we've got to carry the game for a number of years. But we've got to see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Now we have all of a sudden a new type of person in the game, and that's one that thinks that not all the money should go back into the game, that some of the money should go to the investors or to the shareholders.
Coming from soccer, I know what my rights are. I know in the sense the television rights and the commercial rights belong to me at Newcastle, and I'm not going to give them to anybody, you know, and I say this to anybody in the Welsh Union watching this, better understand, I am not surrendering my television or my commercial rights or the right to organise my competitions to any union.
You have a very tiny proportion of those involved in the game who manage in the course of 2 years to run up accumulated debts over £25 million when they're getting about £100 million in revenue. Now, if that's good business, then I prefer the other side.
We have done more for the game at grassroots levels in the northeast of England in the last 3 years than the RFU has done in 100 years. I rest my case.
I would hope that it's a battle which ends in a negotiated peace, which is for the good of the game. If it has to be fought to the end, there can only be one winner, and that's going to be the unions.
Within the game of rugby, within the union, there's an amateur side and there's a professional side. And the clubs can organise the professional side better than the unions, but the unions have the overall responsibility for the discipline, for the rules and everything that goes with it, and for the international games. The game is developing. In a sense, they've got to recognise and they've got to sit down, the unions, and understand what their place is within the new order of the game.
The new order of the game. For 3 years, disorder has been the rule, and there's no end to it in sight. The British League was only the latest false hope in the rugby rebellion. The power struggle is set to rage on.
I'm sure in the long run, you know, it'll help us perform at a better, higher level. But you know, we as an organisation in Swansea, you know, want our chance to do well in Britain and in Europe, and to provide, you know, a solid platform of quality rugby for the supporters who are the mainstay of the club.